Good use of taxpayer money.
I believe it's a good use of taxpayer money for Congress
That is
to
very
appropriate
telling. I
funds.
thank you. I yield back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you. In closing, I want to thank our witnesses once again for their testimony today. And Chairman Comer was going to be here but got tied up. I now yield to the ranking member Stansbury for closing remarks.
All right. Well, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. It's always a wild adventure here in the Oversight Committee. And as the language was just used, wild and sloppy is not what's happening in this committee, but what Elon Musk and Donald Trump are doing to our foreign affairs and foreign aid. And in fact, if my friends across the aisle would like to understand the real world impacts of the tens of thousands of Americans who've been laid off and the people who are suffering around the world, go home and talk to your own constituents, because we know they're coming to your town halls, and we know that behind closed doors, you are calling the president and you are calling secretaries and telling them that your constituents are upset and that you don't support what they're doing. So I do not appreciate you all sitting here pretending like this is not what you support, okay? So let's talk a little bit about the gutting of foreign aid and global realignment that's happening under Trump. They're dismantling this agency. They're withholding funds. They're firing tens of thousands of U.S. aid staff. They're hacking federal data systems. They're stranding aid workers across the world. International food aid is rotting in ports. American farmers have lost millions of dollars in income, and a global realignment with our foreign adversaries, including Vladimir Putin, is happening at a scale unlike anything we have seen in American history. And the administration knows that these activities are illegal. They know that they've overstepped their constitutional authority. They know they're violating statutory law. They know they're violating appropriations law. They know that they're violating federal employment laws. And they know that they are reversing American foreign policy in a way that we have never seen before. And Donald Trump and his allies are trying to redefine the Constitution by tweet. They're threatening federal judges, intimidating federal employees, and yes, even members of Congress using the Department of Justice. And why? We don't know, because not a single person from the administration has come here to testify in this committee or in any committee about what DOGE and Elon Musk are actually doing. And if you look at the so-called transparency that Elon Musk put online, the math does not add up. Talk about wild and sloppy. Our friends across the aisle like to talk about how he's some sort of genius. And this dude couldn't even post a simple spreadsheet that adds up. It's literally off by tens of billions of dollars. You guys, that's wild. I mean, like, literally, that's wild. But in spite of this, our friends across the aisle are acting like everything's normal. And yesterday, last night, they passed a budget resolution that not only is going to gut Medicaid and Medicare, but is going to make these cuts and federal firing permanent, even though they know it is making America less safe. And in the meantime, Elon Musk is actually awarding himself additional federal contracts. In fact, yesterday it was reported that he gave himself the FAA contract for communications. I mean, you guys, this is like graft, waste, fraud, abuse, all of the things. It's happening in front of your eyes, literally, and they are breaking the law while they cozy up to our foreign adversaries. And I know that Donald Trump thinks that he's a king because his social media, of course, he keeps repeating this. But let me say this to you, Mr. Trump. 250 years ago, the people of this great nation rejected a reckless, abusive king, and we won't go back. And for the thousands of federal workers out there, the aid workers, the advocates, and the people around the world who are impacted by these reckless and heartless and harmful and disgusting cuts that are impacting people across the world, know that we see you, we stand with you, we are fighting for you, we are in the courts, we are in Congress, we are in our communities, and we will hold this administration accountable. and we will not abandon our allies or our humanity. So with that, I say to all of you, be strong. We will fight back.
I now recognize myself for closing remarks. And threats against the President of the United States will not be tolerated by anyone. And the math does add up. The United States is $36 trillion in debt. $36 trillion. There's plenty of spreadsheets that show that. As a matter of fact, there's a debt clock. You can watch it continue to tick upwards every single day. In fiscal year 2024, the government spent over $1.8 trillion more than it took in. And in fiscal year 2025, the interest on our debt is expected to exceed $1 trillion. That's everybody. I don't care how you vote. The American people do not want to continue to fund these propaganda campaigns, regime changes, terrorist, LGBTQ initiatives, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and other Democrat globalist initiatives. And even if the people did want to continue supporting such causes, guess what? They can support them with their own money through private donations. Because the reality is, everyone, we are flat out broke. If the U.S. government operated like any other private business, which it should, by the way, it would be completely bankrupt and it would be out of business. Last year, we spent almost $2 trillion more than we took in. The United States government is not a charity, and it is not to be used and abused by the bureaucracy to implement the far left's agenda and impose it on the entire world. Again, 96% of all political contributions from USAID employees go to Democrat Party candidates or PACs. Perhaps that's why we're hearing all the complaining. The revolving door between USAID employees and NGOs that receive USAID funding is undeniable. Maybe we should consider investigating whether USAID funding has made it back to Democrat campaigns. Has it affected elections? The real questions the American people deserve to know answers to are these. Why are we funding 9 out of 10 news outlets in Ukraine? Why was former USAID Administrator Samantha Power visiting Hungary for the purpose of strengthening democratic institutions when Hungary is a country that is strongly democratic and members of the EU and NATO? Why was USAID co-funding joint programs with George Soros' Open Society to promote radical social agendas throughout the developing world? Why is USAID involved in the canceling of elections in Romania? Why is USAID involved in funding court changes in Albania that resulted in the prosecution of the Albanian opposition leader? Why is USAID funding censorship laws in Brazil to silence Bolsonaro? Why is USAID involved in funding the Syrian civil war? What we have learned here today is that USAID has been used as a tool by Democrats to brainwash the world with globalist propaganda to force regime changes around the world. But if USAID funded terrorism that resulted in the death of Americans, then this committee will be making criminal referrals. Lastly, if this is the funding that has come from the USAID, the United States Agency for International Development needs to be abolished. With that and without objection, all members have 5 legislative days within which to submit materials and additional written questions for the witnesses, which will be forwarded to the witnesses. If there is no further business without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.